Howdy everyone, Runt9 here, and welcome to Runt9 Reviews Gordian Quest. Gordian Quest is a neat new game that came out from Mixed Realms that combines a few different mechanics into what has turned out to be a very interesting game. So it has elements of deck building, some roguelike elements, tactical strategic combat. It has a little bit of like Darkest Dungeon persistence and gearing and things like that. And it kind of just puts it all in this one big package. So it sounds like a lot. How about we jump into a little bit of gameplay so you can get a feel for what the game has to offer, and then we'll come back here and I'll tell you what I think about the game. See you in just a second. Alrighty folks, so how about we jump into a little bit of Gordian Quest gameplay. I'm recording this the day after I recorded the rest of the review video, and today I'm feeling a little bit sick, have some coughing and whatnot going on, so I apologize if I don't sound as good as normal. So we're going to start by looking at what happens with a new campaign. So you have 6 different classes to choose from. You've got the Sword Hand, the Cleric, the Ranger, Scoundrel, Spellbinder, and the Druid. They all have some starting skills, and they're basically just different cards in their deck. In addition, they have a starting Strength, Dexterity, and Intelligence, as well as some unlocks that I haven't quite gotten to yet. And so you can see that, the cards are fairly normal, what you would expect. They've got different tags like attack, defense, spell, summon, debuff, things like that. You've got an energy cost in the top left, and then the effect. And, you've got damage, bleed, guard is your block, basically, and things like that. And so it seems fairly straightforward. In addition, the customization system of how each quote-unquote run goes, and I mean, it's not necessarily roguelike in the sense that you have, a 30, 45-minute run, but you have renown points that you get by completing main quest stories, or main story quests during a playthrough, and you can use these to add unlocks to a new run. So for example, you could get an additional random rare skill for 2 renown. With the one that I have, I could get +1 strength or a random starting common item. And so it's a neat way to add a little bit extra into each new playthrough. And so at the moment, only Act 1 exists, but Act 2, 3, and 4 are coming soon. So they have a lot more planned for them. I am going to resume an in-progress run, and this is separate from the YouTube run that's going on at the time of releasing this video. And so we're actually going to take a look at a few different things here. So first, let's go back to the garrison. This is only a little, this is basically the first quest, so there's no real spoilers here or anything. So essentially, you've got this kind of town setup. And again, I'm going to make a lot of references to Darkest Dungeon. So here you've got Captain Roderick, who gives you some quests. You've got Sister Ophelia, where you come in and it heals your party. You can revive a fallen hero, and you can also give alms to get fate points. Fate points are used mostly to re-roll a bad challenge roll, which challenge rolls are done in a very D&D-esque way. And she also sells some health potions and stuff like that. You've got the guild hall where you can see your party members that you have recruited, and there's not many. Like, it's not Darkest Dungeon where you're getting a huge roster, but at least in the couple playthroughs I've done, I've seen 4 people at a time, but I've not seen any more than that, and you can kind of rotate them in. And then you've got the blacksmith, which sells some different items, and so you can see that you've got 25 gold and 55 gold, and what you're not seeing here is that there are 2 other levels of items. So 25 is for your common. This is for green is for magic items. And there's rare, which is blue, and then orange, which is unique. A fairly common setup. And then you can sell, and later on there's some salvaging, and it looks like there should be some crafting as well. And then in the future, you'll get a couple more things unlocked as well that give you a few other buildings for buying and selling goods. Each character, again, has some skills. They've got a bunch of different equipment slots, and equipment most of the time will just be stat increases, but a lot of equipment, especially like weapons and armor, will give you new skills. Like this ring, +1 attack damage, +1 strength. But if I look at this guy, how about we go back and look at something that Jun has? So like the throwing daggers, it gives you 2 skills that go into your deck. And that's mostly how the deck building works, in addition to the skill tree. And something that's not immediately obvious is you can kind of see these little lines that branch off of these. When you get to a certain point on your skill tree, I think it was level 7 or so, level 7 or 8, you get another grid like this that I think is static, but it might be randomly generated. And then you can put it on one of these 4 edges to keep going. And I think you're going to get more and more of those as well to continue growing this. If I zoom all the way out, there's a lot of real estate here. And so these skills are things like random skills, or you can focus in on a certain type of card. And then each of them always have a discard, which is remove it from your deck, skill mastery, which is upgrade a card, new talent, and increased max HP. And talents are just, you know, some fairly basic things like +2 to perception, +2 to events in the wilderness, can use daggers and swords, bows and quivers, so on and so forth. And so all of this kind of ties together into the combat system, which I think this is just going to be an event. So we might get to see some dice rolling. We're going to skip over some of the lore. So yeah, this will be some dice rolling. You can see you can either force the door or search for another point of entry. And so this is either a strength or an intelligence check. And we have a 55% chance either way. Let's force the door. So what that just told you is basically, here's what the roll looks like initially. You need a 12 to succeed, and you've got a +3. So basically, you need to roll a 9 or better. However, you can pick a skill from your deck to exhaust, which means it will not... It still exists in your deck, but if you draw it during the next battle, you cannot use it. So I think I'm actually going to do that on Forceful Swipe for a +6. Now you only need a 3 or better. So it's a huge increase, but with the risk of, hey, I might have to drop one of my more powerful cards in order to get there. So now we have a reflex check, and we need 7. So how about we throw on... And so each card... or most cards will have blue, green, or red, and those relate to intelligence, dexterity, or strength. So because this is a dexterity check, by using a dexterity card, I get a higher modifier. So we rolled a 5 and was able to get that, but now she has 2 skills exhausted for the next combat, which we're going to jump into combat. And so combat works off of a D&D style initiative order. You can always see that at the top. So like the guard NPC that's with us rolled a 31, and then we have both of our people tied at 13, and then the enemies have much lower initiative in this case. For the enemies, you can see exactly what card they're going to play and who they're going to attack. And this is the biggest difference from, you know, a Darkest Dungeon or a Slay the Spire, is this tactical grid-based layout. And the grid size does differ in just about every battle you do. Sometimes it'll only be 2x3. Sometimes I think I've seen a 4x4. So it differs quite a lot, and the movement is very interesting. You can see a list of buffs, you've got some HP and stuff like that. So with our Spellbinder here, let's take a look at something. Well, how about we do a little bit of damage and burn and just try to get this frontline guy down. I mean, I'm not going to focus too much on strategy right now. So this is an interesting way to do like triggered passive abilities, is we can apply 2 shock to the target after our next attack. So if we go in, we're going to deal 10 damage, apply 1 bleed, and 2 shock, which makes them take more damage on the next attack. And then if we were to... Hurl Javelin can only be used in your lane, so if we swap over here, we can use Hurl Javelin to go ahead and kill this dude, and then end our turn. And yeah, we're going to take some damage here. Or no, the guard is going to take some damage. Our Spellbinder took some damage from that spear getting thrown. And so it's got that impact and that feeling that Darkest Dungeon's combat system has, and I just absolutely love that. You know, it's very, very satisfying to feel those hits and those powerful attacks. I'm going to put up some guard and then hit this dude. And so we're probably not going to go all the way through this combat, but basically afterwards you get some loot. Sometimes it's rare, sometimes it's not. And it ends up being, you know, just a very smooth, very clean system with a lot of things going on. And I'm going to talk a lot about the mechanical breadth of this game. There's a ton of different mechanics, as you've already seen. You've got deck building, you've got loot, you've got this, you know, persistent town that you're building up. You've got this tactical combat. It's not just regular turn-based strategy, like this is turn-based tactics. And, you know, it just has a bunch of wonderful things going for it. I think this is an absolutely neat combat system that, you know, adds a lot of value to this type of game. And I mean, at this point, I'm mostly just continuing to talk for the sake of talking, but you can really get a feel for what's going on. And we actually just lost a wizard there. I don't remember if I turned on roguelike mode in this run, so that is something you can turn on, is you can turn on roguelike mode, which is basically just permadeath. Basically, do you want to have it where when someone dies, they die for good or not? But that's going to do it for the gameplay. How about we hop into my regular review stuff? Once again, I apologize for my voice during this part of the video. See you in a second. Alrighty, hopefully you all enjoyed that look at what Gordian Quest has to offer from a gameplay perspective. And, you know, it has a lot going on, so you certainly only got a sneak peek, but hopefully it kind of gives you a good idea of what to expect. Now we're going to jump into my thoughts and opinions using the cards review system that I use on this channel. If you don't know what I'm talking about, there's always a link in the description of each review video to the format introduction that I did that kind of outlines how the reviews on this channel work. And so starting off with the core gameplay loop, you know, ultimately with a game like Gordian Quest that has a lot of mechanics going on for it, you have to think, how good is each individual mechanic? And I think that each individual mechanic and the sum of all of the parts is really good. So I'm giving the core gameplay loop an A-. And yes, I said all the mechanics are really good, but I do think that they're not as deep as they probably should be. The game cast a very wide net. It added a lot of good elements into the game, but there's, you know, in various different places, I felt like I wanted more loot, more cards, more skills, you know, more tactical plays in battle, you know, more different kinds of cards. You know, I like the renown system, and I've gotten to play with that a little bit. And there's a lot of good things it has going for it. And again, like A- isn't low. I just feel like it doesn't quite hit the mechanical depth of a lot of the games that it pulls the mechanics from. And it also doesn't necessarily do anything unique in the sense that I don't feel like there's anything that it does that another game hasn't already done better. It just combines a lot of mechanics in a game that does something with all those parts that no other game has ever done, as far as I've seen. And so I think that makes it very interesting. It makes it very fun, but I just don't think that as it's mechanically rich, it's not necessarily mechanically deep. And that's why it sits at that A-. It doesn't quite step up into that higher echelon. And moving into the game's atmosphere, you know, ultimately you have to think about it's a fairly long playthrough, not necessarily a normal roguelike run length. So how immersed are you that whole time? How well do the graphics and sound support that? I'm giving the atmosphere a B+. I think that the graphical style is very good. I think the UI is very clean and functional. It doesn't get in your way at all, and it's usually pretty easy to find what you're going for. I think there's maybe a couple things that some quality of life cleanups could have, but not a lot of complaints there. I don't think the graphical style is anything to necessarily write home about, but it's very clean and it works very well. It is pretty, but it's not, you know, super top tier amazing. Sound design is good. I love the impact on attacks. You know, that's something that Darkest Dungeon kind of stylized a new way. I mean, it's not necessarily unique, but like that high impact of the zoom in on a hit, and especially on a kill. And Gordian Quest does that a lot as well. And I like that. I like the impact. I like the sound associated with it. I think that it is really, really nice. And the immersion from the story aspect, I don't necessarily care for the story in the game. It's just yet another fighting back the undead game. And that's fine. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Just from my perspective, I don't think that part is super immersive. But I do like how attached you can get to your characters as you specialize their skills and their loot and everything like that. You build up their decks. So I really like the way that builds up. And so it does have a lot of good things going for it. I just don't think any of it is necessarily top tier. And that's why it sits at that B+ and doesn't really get into the A's. Now, moving into the game's replayability. This is something where I wavered a lot on the score because I think the renown system adds some interesting playstyle differences from quote-unquote run to run, especially if you do roguelike mode and you have like a full party wipe or something. It will end your run and you can start a new one. And so I find that interesting that it's got roguelike elements, a lot like Darkest Dungeon. Like if you lose every party member in Darkest Dungeon, your run is over. So I like those elements. But I feel like going back to the mechanical depth, I don't know that there's enough mechanical depth that it's going to have a huge amount of staying power. So I'm giving the replayability an A-. And again, same thing as a core gameplay loop for basically the same reasons. I want to try out the different characters, I want to try different combinations, and I want to try different strategies. But I feel very much like I'm going to end up in a situation where I'm doing the same strategies, the same things over and over. I don't think there's enough differences in the different kinds of loot. That's the biggest thing. There's a lot of loot, but I don't think the additions of the loot are quite enough. I like the skill tree. I was probably sitting more in the B tier until I learned on one of the episodes how the skill tree grows as your characters level up. And I think that was a big boost to build diversity. But I just don't know that there's necessarily enough cards, enough loot to really increase the overall depth that replayability kind of requires. And that's why I'm sitting at that A-. Now, to talk about the game's difficulty, you kind of have to step back and think, how difficult do I want the game to be? There's different difficulty options, and so you can kind of customize from that perspective. And also, the game does start off super easy, and I feel like it has some spikes. I think that you run into these situations where you're either under-leveled and it's really difficult, or you're going into a battle and you just kind of cruise through it. And I think that it's good to have a little bit of that dichotomy, but I feel like the game does a little bit too much of that. And that's why it sits at that B+. I think that it scales reasonably well. I feel like the cards are fairly balanced. I didn't feel like one class was super overpowered or anything. But I do think from a difficulty perspective, some enemies are incredibly frustrating. You guys are kind of probably already saw the first bat episode. I think the bats are incredibly frustrating, and that's going to happen. And I do think that in most situations, your strategy and tactics will far outweigh any RNG that can happen from not drawing the right cards. But that definitely is a thing that can happen. And being able to mitigate that, I don't know that there's enough ways to mitigate that. It's also kind of hard to add the right level of block cards to your deck. And so far, I haven't seen anything that increases the amount of energy other than a buff that Lucius has that gives haste. And so you very often end up in a situation where it's hard to deal with the enemies by a combination of attacking and blocking. So I think the difficulty is good, but it leaves a lot to be desired, especially with the way the difficulty can spike at times. That's why I'm giving it a B+. And then for the support for the game, I'd say Mixed Realms has done a great job. Throughout the entire launch week, they were doing bug fixes and patches the entire week long. They seem to be very engaged with the community and, listening and whatnot. I want to see a little bit more outreach. I think that this is yet another game that could very much work with Steam Workshop in a very positive way. So I'm giving it an A-. And obviously, it's really hard to tell because of how early on in the game's life cycle I'm reviewing this game. So far, I think the developers are doing a great job. I fully expect this A- to go up over time, but there's not enough information. I almost considered not giving it a support rating because it's so early on. But based on what I've seen from the development group, I think it's going to be very good moving forward. And that's why I'm giving it an A-, but I don't have a lot more to say on it. So as a final recap for Gordian Quest, that was core gameplay loop at an A-, atmosphere at a B+, replayability at an A-, difficulty at a B+, and support at an A-. And I realize that sounds very repetitive, but I did try to take each one as its own value and not think about what any of the other values were. Now, stepping into my final tier ranking, you're looking at it and saying, well, the lowest ranking you gave anything was a B+, and the highest ranking you gave anything was an A-. So where does that really fall? And for me, it kind of falls right on that border of transcendent and special. And I think just because of where the game is in its current state, I'm going to slide that just into the special tier. And again, I'm going to go back to the mechanical depth. There are a ton of mechanics in this game. There's a lot of wonderful, fun things that work out for this game. And, you know, for me, the special tier is for those games that do something that no other game did. In this case, the game didn't necessarily create new mechanics. It just took some wonderful mechanics from other games and put it all together in a package that I hadn't seen in another game before. And I still feel like that's special because combining different mechanics into what is essentially a brand new game. I mean, it's basically take Darkest Dungeon and add a deck builder in a sense. And ultimately, like, if you added a deck builder to Darkest Dungeon, it completely changes it. And also make the Darkest Dungeon a grid instead of just a single line. And now you've got all sorts of stuff going on. It is really, really good. And it belongs in the special tier. I don't think it bridges that gap enough, though, to go into the transcendent tier. I don't think it does something that's so fresh and new or so exciting and so good that I want to push it into that upper echelon. And again, I think that it might potentially get there if they add more mechanical depth and add, you know, more of its own unique stuff. I do think the Renown system is reasonably innovative, but it's still a fairly common roguelite trope of I'm going to give you some sort of meta currency for doing things in a run, and then your next run you can add more power. And it's slightly innovative in the sense of how you get it and the different things you can do with it, but it's still pretty much a tried and true formula that yet again is another mechanic slapped into the game. And again, I don't think any mechanic feels out of place. I don't feel like they did, you know, a kitchen sink, throw everything in the game. I think it is a very tight core set of mechanics. I just want more from each of them. I think they went a little bit too wide instead of focusing on building each of them up a little bit. And that's why it falls into that special tier. It is still an amazing game. I had a ton of fun with it this week, and you're going to be seeing a lot more of this game in the future, whether it be on YouTube or on Twitch. So be sure to keep an eye out for that. It is a special game. That's Gordian Quest. So I really want to say, you know, thank you all for the support. I've really been enjoying doing these reviews, and I'm excited to keep doing this. So thank you so much for watching this. Let me know your feedback on these reviews, likes, dislikes, comments. There's now a community Discord at Runt9 Plays on Twitter. All great ways to get in contact with me. I know I have a link tree, so linktree/Runt9 Plays. That's also a good way to keep up with the different links, whether social media changes, whatever. You know, then you don't have to remember the Discord URL or the YouTube channel. Just there's a link tree, makes it nice and simple. Yeah, I don't have much else to say. I'm really happy to continue doing this. I'm really excited, and you know, thank you guys so much for the support. Until the next Runt9 reviews, I'm Runt9, and I will see you later.